The restaurant was always busy in the evenings, and the warm yellow lights made the place look softer than it really was. People talked, laughed, and clinked glasses, but none of that noise ever seemed to lift the weight that sat quietly on the young waitress's shoulders. She moved between tables with calm steps, placing plates down gently, taking orders with a polite smile, and disappearing before anyone could look too closely at her. She did her best to blend into the background. That was how she preferred it. Staying unseen meant staying safe. Most customers didn't pay much attention to the staff, but she didn't mind. She wasn't looking for attention. She hadn't looked for it in years. She worked simply to earn enough to get by, to pay rent, to keep her mind busy so it had less time to wander into memories she wished she could forget. Even though she was young, her eyes carried something older inside them, as if she had lived more life in a short time than many did in decades. She tied her hair back every shift and always wore the same small silver bracelet on her left wrist. It was the only piece of her past that she allowed herself to keep close. Everything else she had learned to let go of, one painful piece at a time, that her coworkers liked her well enough. They said she was quiet but kind, dependable, and good under pressure. She didn't talk much about her personal life, so they didn't ask. They thought she was simply private, maybe shy. They had no idea what she used to be, who she once hoped to become, or how quickly life could pull someone off their path. The restaurant itself sat in the heart of the city, right between tall buildings with glowing signs and wide sidewalks filled with fancy cars. It attracted an expensive crowd, people who spoke loudly about business deals, bragged about vacations, and ordered expensive wine like it was water. Many of them expected to be treated like royalty, and some acted as though the staff existed, just to make their night perfect. There was one customer who stood out more than anyone else. A wealthy man who visited often, always wearing an expensive suit and a confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He walked with the air of someone who believed the world moved just for him. Whenever he arrived, the staff straightened up a bit more, not because they liked him, but because they knew how demanding he could be. The waitress always kept her distance from him when she could. Something about the way he looked at people made her uncomfortable, as if he enjoyed feeling powerful over anyone who had to serve him. He wasn't loud or rude in the obvious way. Instead, he spoke softly but sharply, choosing his words like little knives that cut without leaving a mark visible to others. She had learned long ago to avoid attention from people like him. Attention could lead to questions. Questions could lead to stories. And stories could lead her back to the past she was trying so hard to leave behind. Before life had changed, she loved music more than anything. The piano was her world. She practiced every day for hours, not because anyone forced her to, but because she felt something come alive in her when her fingers touched the keys. Music had once opened doors for her, making her feel like she belonged to something bigger and brighter. But life had a way of shifting suddenly. Dreams that once felt solid could crumble with one unexpected moment. The piano she had loved so deeply now lived only in her memories. She hadn't touched a keyboard in years. Even hearing music sometimes made her chest tighten. So she avoided it. She avoided everything that might remind her of what she lost. Now her days were simple, predictable. She woke up early, worked long shifts, went home to a small apartment, cooked something plain, and fell asleep listening to the quiet hum of city traffic. It wasn't the life she imagined, but it was safe. Safe enough. Tonight, though, felt different from the moment she walked into the restaurant. The atmosphere seemed charged, as if the whole place was preparing for something big. People rushed around more than usual, straightening candles, polishing glasses, checking menus. The manager kept repeating that everything needed to be perfect because a private event would be happening in the back room. She didn't know much about the event, except that it involved important guests, the kind who expected things to be flawless. She didn't worry about the details. Her job was simply to help where she could, deliver dishes, keep drinks filled, and stay out of the way. But still, something about the night made her uneasy. She felt it in her stomach, a small tug of nerves that she couldn't explain. Maybe it was just the added pressure, or maybe it was the thought that the wealthy regular, the man whose presence always made her tense, would probably be there. His parties were known to be grand and filled with people who loved to watch others perform for their amusement. As she worked through the first hour, she noticed small details that made the event feel even more elaborate than usual. A large grand piano had been moved into the corner of the private room, polished so well that the lights reflected off its surface. She didn't look at it for long. Just one glance was enough to stir something inside her chest that she didn't want to feel. The last time she sat at a piano had been years ago, back when everything felt possible. Back when she believed hard work and passion could take her anywhere. She pushed the memory away quickly, forcing her mind back to the present. One of her coworkers noticed her staring for a second and nudged her lightly. "Looks nice, doesn't it?" they said with a smile. She nodded politely. "Yeah, it's beautiful." She didn't say anything more. The manager soon gathered the staff and explained that the event was starting soon. The guests were already arriving, men in sharp suits, women in elegant dresses, all of them speaking confidently and laughing as if nothing in life ever worried them. It was a world far from her own. She carried trays in and out, moving through the crowd like a quiet shadow. No one noticed her, and that was exactly how she liked it. She kept her eyes down, avoiding any chance of meeting the gaze of the wealthy man she hoped wouldn't be there tonight, but he was. She spotted him across the room, greeting people with a smile and a glass of wine in hand. His posture, his tone, his confidence, it all made her shrink just a little inside. She turned away quickly, hoping he wouldn't see her. For the next hour, everything went as usual. She refilled drinks, removed empty plates, and listened quietly to the conversations around her. Most guests paid her no mind, but some gave her little polite nods or quiet thank yous as she passed. Small kindnesses always surprised her, even though she never expected them. But the whole time, that uneasy feeling stayed in her stomach. As she walked past the piano, she kept her distance, refusing to look directly at it again. She didn't want to think about music. She didn't want to think about the person she used to be. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself she was just tired. Long shifts often made her mind wander. But deep down, she sensed that something was waiting just ahead, something she couldn't avoid. Her quiet life had been built on staying unnoticed, staying in control, keeping her past locked firmly away. But nights like this had a strange way of breaking patterns. Sometimes, life brought certain moments into a person's path, whether they were ready or not. As she carried another tray into the private room, the door closed gently behind her, and she didn't know that in just a short while. A single unexpected moment would shake the very ground she had built her quiet world upon. The night had settled deeper into the city, and the party in the private room grew louder and more crowded as time passed. The music from the speakers mixed with laughter, clinking glassware, and the constant hum of conversation. But beneath all that noise, the waitress could feel something slowly changing in the air. It wasn't anything she could point to or name, but it made her feel as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting, little by little, toward something she didn't want. She kept moving, doing her best to stay focused. The trays felt heavier in her hands tonight, even though they held the same things they always did. Empty plates, half-finished drinks, glasses waiting to be washed. Her mind drifted more often than she liked, slipping into old memories and old sounds she had buried long ago. Each time she passed the grand piano sitting proudly in the corner, she felt a small pinch inside her chest. She tried to ignore it. She tried to pretend it wasn't there at all, but it was. The wealthy man hosting the event stood near the center of the room, speaking with a group of guests. He laughed at something one of them said, but even his laughter had a sharpness to it. His eyes scanned the room often, as if he was always looking for someone or something to amuse him. He liked moments he could control. He liked people he could push. It gave him a quiet satisfaction that made others feel uneasy without really knowing why. The waitress stayed on the opposite side of the room as much as she could. She moved behind guests, careful not to draw attention, careful not to let anyone notice the slight nervousness in her eyes. Her job was simple, and she wanted to keep it that way. Everything changed in a single instant. She was walking toward a table, carrying a tray with several glasses. Her steps were steady. Her focus was clear. But as she passed behind a group of guests, someone shifted unexpectedly, bumping into her arm. One of the glasses tipped over, spilling a streak of liquid that splashed onto the edge of a tablecloth and brushed the sleeve of the wealthy man standing nearby. The tray didn't fall. Nothing shattered. The spill was small, but the moment felt huge. The room didn't fall silent, but a few people looked over, just enough to make her feel exposed, just enough to make her heart jump into her throat. She set the tray down quickly and apologized softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The wealthy man looked at the small wet patch on his sleeve, then slowly lifted his eyes to her. There was no kindness in his stare, only a slow, amused curiosity, as if he had been handed a new toy he wasn't sure how to use yet. "It's nothing," one of the guests said lightly. "Just a little spill." But the man wasn't listening to them. His attention stayed fixed on the waitress, and she felt a chill run across her skin. She had seen that look before on people who enjoyed having an audience when someone weaker felt afraid. She stepped back, ready to leave the circle of attention, hoping the moment would pass. But he stopped her. "No need to rush off," he said, his tone smooth but carrying something sharp beneath it. "Since you're already part of our evening, maybe you'd like to give us something more memorable." She froze. I should get back to work." He lifted his hand slightly, gesturing toward the corner of the room, toward the piano. "Why don't you play something for us?" He asked. His smile grew. "That piano has been sitting there all night. Seems a shame for it to stay quiet." Her blood turned cold. She shook her head gently. "I can't. I don't." "Nonsense," he said, cutting her off. "It's just a bit of music. Everyone here would enjoy it." Some guests laughed softly, thinking he was making a harmless joke. Others looked mildly curious. None of them understood the weight pressing on her chest or the panic tightening her throat. "I really can't," she said, her voice growing smaller. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. The man raised an eyebrow, his smile turning almost playful, though the edge in his expression made it clear he wasn't joking. "Come now. You spilled something on me. Think of this as a way to make it up." "It was an accident," a guest said, trying to ease the tension. But the man didn't look away from her. He was enjoying this, enjoying holding her in place, enjoying the quiet discomfort spreading across her face. He liked moments where he could show the difference between himself and those who served him. "Play," he said again, this time softer, but somehow more firm. She felt the room closing in. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. She could already feel memories she had been avoiding rising up, uninvited. She didn't want this. She didn't want to go near that piano. She didn't want anyone watching her, but people were watching. More now than before. Some with interest, some with mild amusement, some waiting to see what would happen next. Her throat tightened as she tried to think of a way out. She could refuse outright, but the man hosting the event had influence. not just in the restaurant, but all around the area. Refusing him openly could cost her more than just a moment of embarrassment. It could cost her job, and a job was something she couldn't afford to lose. She looked toward the manager across the room, hoping for help. But the manager only watched uncertainly, unsure of whether to intervene. After all, this was an important guest, a powerful one. The wealthy man took a slow step toward her, lowering his voice just enough so only she could hear. "It's not a request." His tone was polite, but the threat beneath it was clear. She felt her breath shake. She didn't want anyone to see her fear, so she looked down. Wishing she could disappear into the floor. The guests were waiting. The piano was waiting. And suddenly, she realized she had no choice but to move. Her feet felt heavy as she walked toward the corner of the room. Each step felt like walking through water. She could feel eyes following her, curious and expectant. The piano sat in the warm light, its black surface shining as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. She stopped in front of it, her stomach tight and painful. She touched the edge lightly, almost shaking. She hadn't touched piano keys in years. Not since the world she knew fell apart. Not since music became a reminder of everything she had lost. She closed her eyes for a moment, forcing herself to breathe slowly. She wished she could run. She wished she could wake up and find this was all a dream. But when she opened her eyes, the room was still staring. The man who had pushed her stood with a satisfied smile, enjoying the scene he had created. She sat down slowly on the bench. Her hands rested in her lap, cold and stiff. For a moment, she didn't move at all. She simply breathed, staring at the keys as if they were strangers she never expected to meet again. She could walk away. She could stand up and refuse. But something inside her whispered that refusing wouldn't. And this moment, it would only make it worse. So she lifted her hands. The first touch of her fingertips against the smooth keys sent a weak tremor through her. It felt familiar and foreign all at once. A doorway she once walked through freely, now locked by fear. Behind her, the room grew quiet. Even the guests who hadn't been paying attention before were now watching. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, every breath, every expectation. But she couldn't play. Not yet. Her hands hovered, frozen above the keys. Old memories flickered behind her eyes, warm rooms filled with music. The gentle voice of someone she once loved, the hope she used to carry inside her. She blinked hard, pushing the memories away. This wasn't the time for them. She had no control over this moment, but she could control her breath. She inhaled slowly and exhaled, one note. That was all she needed to start. She pressed a single key. A soft tone filled the air. The sound was small, but it echoed like a memory she couldn't escape. She swallowed, her throat tight. Behind her, the wealthy man watched eagerly, waiting for the show he thought he was about to get, waiting for her embarrassment, waiting for the awkwardness he had tried to create. She felt the weight of his expectation pressing down on her. She felt the tension in the room. She felt the fragile quiet stretching around her. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew this moment was only the beginning of something she never saw coming. The quiet in the room felt heavier with every passing second. The guests had paused their conversations, their laughter fading as they turned their attention toward the piano. The soft light from the chandeliers cast a warm glow across the room, but to the young waitress sitting at the piano bench, everything felt cold. Her hands still hovered above the keys, unsure, unsteady. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips. It wasn't fear alone that made them shake. It was something deeper, years of distance from the thing she once loved most. Music was a part of her life she had sealed shut long ago, like a door that kept memories from spilling out. And now here she was, forced to open it again in front of a room full of strangers. The wealthy man who pushed her into this situation stood just a few steps away. His eyes were sharp, curious, and filled with a strange excitement. He wasn't waiting for music. He was waiting for a moment of weakness. He wanted her to stumble, to feel small, to entertain him in a way that had nothing to do with the piano. But she wouldn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on the keys, trying to steady her breathing. She took a quiet breath, hoping no one could see how nervous she was. The first note she played still echoed in her mind, reminding her of everything she had left behind. More than anything, she wanted to get up and walk away. She wanted to return to the safety of the kitchen, the familiar clatter of dishes, the scent of food, the rhythm of work that never asked her to be more than she was. But she couldn't. The moment had already pulled her in too tightly. Her fingers brushed lightly over the keys again. The surface was smooth, cool, familiar, in a way that almost hurt. She didn't know what to play. She didn't want to play anything at all. Her mind raced through pieces she used to know, songs she once practiced for hours, music that once carried her through both joy and sorrow. But now, standing in front of all these wealthy guests, with the pressure of their eyes on her, those pieces felt far away, like they belonged to a different lifetime. She closed her eyes for a moment. Just one breath. One small second of quiet inside her mind. A soft flash of memory passed through her. A warm room, a smaller piano, gentle voices encouraging her, hands guiding hers across the keys. A voice she loved saying, "Play what you feel, not what you think they want to hear." The memory made her chest tighten, but it also gave her a little strength. She opened her eyes. Her fingers settled on the keys, still trembling slightly. She didn't choose a complicated piece or anything impressive. Instead, she let her hands drift into a simple melody, something she used to play when she was younger. A melody that felt safe. A melody her hands remembered, even if her heart struggled. She pressed the first few notes. The sound was soft, a little uneven at first. But the moment the notes reached the air, the room shifted. Guests fell even quieter. Conversations stopped completely. Even the servers passing by paused for a second to listen. She didn't look at anyone. Her whole focus stayed on the melody. Each note seemed to loosen something inside her, untangling knots she didn't even realize were still there. She kept the piece simple, letting her hands guide her instead of her thoughts. After a minute, the melody grew steadier. Her hands shook less. Her breath felt smoother. It was like walking into a memory she once tried to forget, but this time, the memory didn't hurt as much. The wealthy man's smile faded a little. Not because he disliked the music, but because he wasn't getting the reaction he expected. He wanted her to be embarrassed, to fumble, to look foolish. But instead, she seemed to sink into the music as if it were a place she knew better than this room, full of strangers. She still wasn't confident. Her heart still beat too fast. But as she continued to play, something changed in her posture. Her shoulders relaxed. Her fingers moved with more certainty. The melody grew warmer, fuller, brushing gently across the room. Some guests exchanged surprised glances. They whispered softly to each other, impressed. No one had expected the quiet waitress to know how to play, let alone with this much feeling. One guest near the front tilted their head, listening more carefully. Another placed a hand over their heart without realizing it. The simple, quiet notes carried something thoughtful, something sincere, something real. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply trying to survive the moment without breaking apart. But the sincerity of her playing made the room shift in a way no one expected. Halfway through the melody, she hesitated. A small mistake slipped from her fingers, a note that didn't belong. It struck her like a jolt, pulling her briefly out of the moment. Her hands stiffened, and she almost stopped. The wealthy man smirked slightly, as if he had been waiting for this. She felt her confidence wobble. Her breathing grew uneven again. She could almost hear her own heartbeat louder than the music. But then she reminded herself, this wasn't a performance. She wasn't on a stage. She wasn't in a contest. She wasn't trying to be perfect, Dot. She was just trying to get through this moment. She took another breath and kept going. The next notes came more gently, as if she were calming herself down through the music. The tension in her chest loosened bit by bit. The guests could feel it too. The shift was small, but it mattered. It made the music feel more human, more real. No one cared about the tiny mistake. Many didn't even notice. They were too drawn into the calm but emotional way she played. Even the wealthy man's smirk faded as he realized she wasn't falling apart the way he planned. She wasn't giving him the spectacle he wanted. Instead, she was creating a moment he couldn't control. Dot. By the time she reached the end of the simple melody, the room felt completely different from before. Softer, quieter, almost thoughtful. Dot. She let the final note fade slowly into the air. Her fingers rested on the keys, still for a moment. She didn't dare look up. She didn't want to see the faces watching her, but she could feel the weight of the silence in the room. A deep, full silence, not awkward, but filled with something gentler. Dot. Then a guest near the front started clapping softly. Another joined, and then another. Soon the entire room applauded, some politely, some warmly, some with a look of surprise in their eyes. The waitress lowered her hands quickly, her face warming with embarrassment. She didn't feel proud of her playing. She wasn't even sure how she felt at all. A mix of relief, fear, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite name. She stood up slowly and took a small step back from the piano. She wanted nothing more than to disappear into the kitchen and pretend none of this ever happened. But before she could move, the wealthy man stepped forward. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was something else, something unreadable. Maybe annoyance. Maybe confusion. Maybe disbelief. Well, he said with a slow smile that didn't reach his eyes, that was unexpected. Some guests glanced at him with mild disapproval. They had enjoyed the music, and his tone felt unnecessarily sharp. She said nothing. She kept her eyes low, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. He stepped a little closer. Tell me, how long have you been hiding that talent? I don't really play anymore, she answered quietly. Clearly you do, he replied, a hint of challenge in his voice. She shook her head gently. Not like I used to. He tilted his head, studying her as though trying to uncover a secret. He didn't like not knowing things. He didn't like not being in control. Well, he said finally, his voice smooth again. Thank you for the performance. She nodded politely, eager to step away. The applause had ended. Conversations were starting again, though many guests still watched her, as she took a few quiet steps backward, distancing herself from the piano. Dot. Her breathing was uneven. Her hands were cold. But deep inside her, a tiny spark flickered, an unexpected warmth she didn't ask for. A reminder of something she used to love before life changed. She didn't want the warmth. She wasn't ready for it. But it was there, faint but present. Dot. As she walked back toward the kitchen, trying to collect herself, she didn't see the small group of guests whispering excitedly. She didn't see the way their eyes followed, her with interest instead of dismissal. She didn't know that. This moment would open a door she never planned to walk through again. All she knew was that something inside her had shifted, and that the night was far from over. The moment she slipped back into the hallway behind the kitchen doors, she let out a long, shaky breath she had been holding without realizing it. Her heart was still racing, and her hands still felt cold from the tension of playing in front of so many people. She leaned lightly against the wall, trying to slow her breathing, trying to remind herself that the moment was over. It was done. She had survived it, but even as she stood there, the soft echoes of the melody she had played lingered in her mind. A part of her wished the memories would quiet down, but another part feared they never would now. She had spent so long avoiding the piano, avoiding music altogether, because it hurt too much to remember the life she lost. Playing again felt like peeling open a door she had nailed shut. For a few seconds, she closed her eyes. The noise from the kitchen pots clattering, orders being called out, the sizzle of pans felt grounding. It pulled her mind back into the present, back into the world she knew how to handle. A coworker walked past her and paused. "Hey, are you okay?" they asked softly. She straightened a little and nodded. "Yeah, just needed a second." "You played beautifully," they said with genuine warmth. She offered a small smile, though she wasn't sure she believed the compliment. "Thanks." The coworker returned to their tasks, leaving her alone again. She stood there for another moment before pushing herself to return to the dining area. She didn't want to go back, not while the guests still had her performance fresh in their minds, but she couldn't hide forever. She had a job to do. When she stepped back into the private event room, the atmosphere had changed slightly. The music from the speakers played softly again, but the guests' conversations had shifted. Several people glanced her way when she entered. Not the dismissive glances she was used to. These were curious, surprised, almost impressed. She kept her eyes low, doing her best to move quietly between tables, collecting empty glasses and setting down new drinks. But it became harder to stay invisible because people weren't ignoring her anymore. One guest stopped her gently. "Excuse me," they said with a friendly tone. "You played earlier, right?" She hesitated but nodded. "Yes, I just wanted to say it was lovely," the guest said. "I didn't expect it at all. You have a gift." "Thank you," she replied softly, then moved on quickly. Another guest, an older woman wearing a pearl necklace, spoke to her while she set down a glass of water. "My dear, that music. It was filled with so much emotion. Have you been playing for long?" She froze for a second. She didn't want to talk about her past. She didn't want to open that door any wider. "Since I was young," she said simply. "You must continue," the woman said with kind eyes. "It would be a shame to lose such a gift." She nodded politely, but inside, those words twisted something in her chest. Every compliment she received made her uncomfortable. Not because they were unkind, but because they carried reminders she wasn't ready for. She had worked so hard to build a life without music, without dreaming, without risking disappointment again. She had made peace, or something close to peace, with letting go of that part of herself, but tonight had cracked everything open. As she walked between tables, she caught sight of the wealthy man who had forced her to play. He stood near a tall window, speaking with a pair of guests. His expression was calm, but his eyes flicked toward her every few seconds, studying her the way someone might try to solve a puzzle. She looked away quickly. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he still unsettled her. She also didn't want him to think she had enjoyed playing, even though a tiny part of her had felt something like relief in the music. She continued her work, but with each step, she could feel a different kind of tension building, one that had nothing to do with fear. It was the quiet pressure of memories pushing against her mind, trying to escape, trying to remind her of who she used to be. She had worked so hard to bury that girl. The hopeful girl. The dreamer. The one who believed music could shape her future. Now, that girl was whispering again. An hour passed before the wealthy host finally approached her. She was setting down a tray in the corner when she felt someone step beside her. The air shifted, and she knew before she turned her head who it was. "You certainly surprised everyone tonight," he said with a light, almost praising tone. She kept her eyes on the tray. "I didn't mean to." He chuckled. "Oh, I think you did. People can't stop talking about you." She didn't respond. She didn't trust her voice. He leaned in slightly, as if speaking to her alone made the moment more entertaining. "Tell me, why hide something like that? Most people would give anything for talent like yours." "I just don't play anymore," she said quietly. His tone softened in a way that didn't feel genuine. "Well, after tonight, it seems like you should." She didn't answer, and he watched her for a long moment, as if waiting for something more. When she gave him nothing, he finally stepped back. "Either way," he said, "you made the evening quite interesting." "I'll remember that." She wished he wouldn't. He walked away, his polished shoes clicking lightly against the floor. She let out a slow breath once he was gone. As the night continued, more guests complimented her, each one adding to the pressure building in her chest. She didn't know how to respond beyond short nods and soft thank yous. A few people even asked where she had learned to play, or if she performed anywhere else. She simply shook her head each time. She was grateful when the event finally neared its end. The crowd thinned as guests gathered their coats and stepped out into the cool night. The room grew quieter, giving her space to breathe. When the last of the group left, she began clearing tables with the rest of the staff. The grand piano still sat in the corner, silent once more. She tried not to look at it, but her eyes drifted toward it anyway. It looked different now. Not like a threat. Not like something painful. More like an old friend standing quietly, waiting. She quickly looked away. When everything was cleaned up, she clocked out, grabbed her bag, and stepped out into the night air. The breeze felt cool on her skin, helping calm her still buzzing nerves. The streetlights glowed softly, and the noise of cars rolling by filled the quiet spaces left in her thoughts. She walked the familiar route to her apartment building. Her steps felt heavier than usual, not from exhaustion, but from everything that had stirred inside her tonight. When she reached her small apartment, she slipped off her shoes, set her bag down, and sat at the edge of her bed. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow coming from the window. It was quiet, too quiet. She rested her hands in her lap, and after a moment, she realized her fingers were moving slightly small motions, as if still playing the melody she had performed earlier. She curled her hands into fists. "No," she whispered to herself. Her voice cracked softly. "I'm done with that. I'm done." But her chest felt tight, and her head buzzed with the music she couldn't push away. She stood up and walked to her small kitchen, trying to distract herself by preparing a simple meal. But even as she moved around, the melody followed her. It lingered like a shadow. By the time she sat down to eat, she realized she hadn't taken a full breath in minutes. She set the food aside and rubbed her hands over her face. Everything felt too close, too raw. She thought about the guests' faces, about the applause, about the comments that she should return to playing. She thought about the way the wealthy man had studied her, confused by the fact she wasn't the easy target he expected. She thought about the moment her fingers first touched, the keys, the unexpected warmth that spread through her even though she didn't want it to. She didn't want to care. She didn't want to feel anything for the music again. It hurt too much. The last time she had tried, the world had fallen apart, but the door was open now, and no matter how hard she tried to close it again, something inside her whispered, "Maybe it's time." She shook her head firmly. No. She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the glowing lights of the city. Cars drove by. People walked on sidewalks. The world moved on, completely unaware of the storm forming quietly inside her. The night air drifting in through the small opening in the window felt cool. But it didn't steady her as much as she hoped. She wrapped her arms around herself. Not for warmth, for comfort. She didn't know what was coming next. But deep inside, she knew tonight had changed something. And tomorrow would not be the same. The applause still echoed in the large room, long after the last note had faded. The sound of it felt almost unreal to the young woman who sat at the piano, her hands still trembling slightly from everything that had just happened. For a moment, she did not move. She simply stayed there, staring at the keys as if they were something sacred, something she had been missing for far too long. She slowly rose from the bench, unsure what to do next. Her heart was racing, not from fear now, but from something brighter, something she had not felt in years. She could not fully understand it yet, but it felt like hope real, hope not the small fragile kind she kept, tucked away inside herself. The people in the room were still whispering. Some seemed amazed, others emotional, and a few even looked embarrassed for having laughed at her earlier. She could feel every gaze on her as she stepped away from the piano, and she tried to keep her breathing steady. She had not expected any of this. All she had wanted was to get through the night without drawing attention to herself. But now, attention was the one thing she could not escape. A woman in a long silver dress approached her first. She was smiling warmly, her eyes shining with genuine admiration. "That was beautiful," the woman said. "You play like someone who feels every note. I haven't heard something that heartfelt in a long time." The young woman opened her mouth, but she struggled to find words. Compliments were something she rarely received, and even when she had in the past, they had never come from people like this, people who lived in a world far removed from hers. "Thank you," she whispered finally. Before she could say more, another voice joined in. "You were incredible, truly incredible." This time it was a man with soft gray hair and a calm expression. She recognized him from earlier in the evening. He had been talking with other guests, and she had overheard people mentioning his name in hushed, impressed tones. They said he was someone important, someone with influence in the music world. He looked at her with a gentle seriousness. "How long have you been playing?" She hesitated. "Since I was young," she said quietly. "But I haven't practiced much for a long time." "It didn't sound that way," he replied with a small smile. "You have something rare, a natural feel, a way of bringing emotion into the music. That can't be taught." She felt her cheeks warm. She had heard similar things when she was younger, but she had buried those memories. Life had placed her on a different path, one far away from grand pianos and crowded rooms filled with wealthy people. The man extended his hand. "My name is Adrian. I work with young musicians, helping them develop their careers. If you ever want to return to music, even in a small way, I'd like to help you." The offer stunned her. She looked at his hand, uncertain if she should take it. The idea of returning to music felt impossible, like a dream she no longer had permission to chase. "I'm just a waitress," she whispered. "No," he said firmly but kindly. "You're a musician." Tonight proved that. His words hit her harder than she expected. She swallowed, suddenly aware of how fragile she felt inside. She gently shook his hand, unsure of where this moment would lead. Before she could respond further, a group of party guests gathered around her, each wanting to say something. They offered praise, admiration, and even apologies for underestimating her. She nodded politely, though she felt overwhelmed. She was not used to being the center of attention, and her thoughts kept drifting back to the reason all of this had happened. The host thought she did not see him at first, but eventually she spotted him near a group of guests across the room. His expression was hard to read. He looked tense, almost irritated, as if the outcome of his little performance request had not gone at all the way he expected. He approached her finally, his steps controlled and his smile stiff. "That was," Unexpected, he said in a careful tone. She could sense the awkwardness in his voice. It was clear he had hoped to embarrass her, not make her the star of the evening. For the first time since she had started working at the restaurant, she felt something shift inside her when she looked at him. She was no longer intimidated. "Thank you," she said politely, though without warmth. She refused to shrink under his gaze the way she once had. He seemed unsure how to respond to her confidence. "Well," he said finally, clearing his throat, "I suppose things worked out. The guests enjoyed it." She nodded, ending the conversation without giving him the chance to continue. She did not owe him anything, not an explanation, not gratitude, not even a smile. As she moved away, she found herself standing near the large windows overlooking the city. The lights below sparkled like scattered stars, and for a moment she simply breathed. Everything around her felt surreal. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet moments steady her. A gentle voice spoke behind her. "You handled that well." She turned and saw Adrian again. He stood with his hands in his pockets, giving her space while still offering support. "I didn't feel like I handled anything well," she said with a small, tired laugh. "You did," he replied. "You kept your dignity. Not many people could do that in front of a crowd like this." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't want to play," she admitted softly. "Not because I can't, but because playing reminds me of everything I lost. I walked away from it because life became too heavy." Adrian nodded with understanding. Sometimes life pushes us away from the things we love most. But tonight proved that those things never truly leave us. They wait for the moment we're ready to return. She thought about his words. She thought about the feeling she had felt while playing, the way the room had faded and the music had taken over. She had not felt that alive in years. Adrian continued. "If you ever want to talk, or even just try practicing again, here is my card." He handed her a small white card with his name and contact information. It felt strange to hold something so simple, yet so full of possibility. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "There's no pressure," he assured her. "Just know the door is open." He stepped away to greet another guest, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She slipped the card into her pocket, unsure what she would do next. As the night went on, more guests came to speak with her. Some shared stories about how her playing reminded them of their childhoods, or moved them emotionally in ways they hadn't expected. Others asked if she had recordings or if she performed anywhere. Each time, she explained softly that she was just a waitress, and that this was not something she did anymore. Yet the more she said the words, the more strange they felt. They didn't feel true anymore. Her shift was technically still happening, but none of the staff expected her to return to serving now. They gave her supportive glances from a distance, some even giving her small smiles as if proud of her. It was the first time she had felt seen in her workplace, not as someone who carried trays and hurried between tables, but as a person with a story. When the event finally began to wind down, she quietly collected her belongings from the staff room. The night had felt long and heavy, yet at the same time strangely uplifting. She felt pulled in two different directions, part of her wanting to retreat back to her familiar routine, and another part wanting to explore whatever new path might be opening. As she walked out of the building and stepped into the cool night air, she paused on the sidewalk. The city was quieter now, though the distant sounds of cars and laughter still filled the air. Her fingers brushed against the card in her pocket. She pulled it out and stared at it for a long moment. The name printed on it felt like a doorway she wasn't sure she wanted to open. But maybe she needed to. Maybe it was time. For the first time in a long while, she felt the slightest spark of excitement about tomorrow, something she had not felt in years. And with that feeling warming her chest, she began the walk home, unaware of just how much her life was about to change. The morning after the party arrived quietly, almost too quietly for her restless thoughts. She woke earlier than usual, long before her alarm, and lay still in her small room, staring at the ceiling. Everything that happened the night before played back in her mind as if it were a movie. The piano, the crowd, the applause, the man who had tried to embarrass her, the man who offered her a chance. All of it felt unreal, like a dream that didn't belong to someone like her. She sat up slowly, touching the small white card she had left on her nightstand. It felt heavier today, as though it carried the weight of a choice she wasn't ready to make. Her hands trembled a little as she picked it up. She traced the letters of the name printed on it. She wondered what her life would look like if she called. And she wondered what it would look like if she DIDN single quotes T'd out her day, began like any other. She dressed, tied her hair back, and grabbed her worn bag before heading out into the morning air. But nothing felt normal. Not even the walk to the restaurant, which she usually treated as a time to clear her thoughts. Today, her thoughts rushed faster than her steps at work. The atmosphere had shifted. The moment she stepped inside, the staff turned toward her as if she were someone entirely new. Some of them clapped softly. Others whispered things she couldn't quite hear. A few simply smiled at her, warm and genuine. One coworker approached her first, a friendly server who had worked with her for months. "You were amazing last night," he said. "We all saw it. We couldn't believe it. You looked like you belonged on that stage or whatever that room counts as." Her cheeks warmed. Compliments still felt strange, but this time she didn't shrink from them. "Thank you," she said softly throughout the day. People brought up the performance. Even some customers had heard about it, though she wasn't sure how. The story had spread fast, and she sensed that it wasn't going to fade anytime soon. The host, the same man who had tried to humiliate her, did not show up at the restaurant that day. She wasn't sure if she felt relieved or disappointed. Maybe both. She had expected him to act differently after the night before. But maybe staying away was his version of dealing with the embarrassment. During her break, she sat outside behind the restaurant, staring at the same card again. She held it between her fingers, turning it back and forth. Part of her wanted to call. Part of her was terrified to. She thought back to the feeling she had while playing the calm that had washed over her. The way the notes had carried her. The way she had felt connected to something she thought she'd lost forever. She missed that feeling even now, sitting on a cold crate with her lunch untouched beside her. Finally, she pulled out her phone. Her heart beat loudly in her chest as she typed in the number. She didn't call. Not yet. She just let her thumb hover over the button. Today, she told herself quietly. But soon, when her shift finally ended, she walked home slowly, her thoughts heavy but focused. She kept thinking about what the music producer Adrian had said. Something about doors being open. Something about moments waiting for the right time. She entered her apartment, set down her bag, and sank into the old chair near the window. Outside, the city lights were starting to glow. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had once been trained, disciplined, capable. Last night had shown her they still were. She stayed quiet for a long time, thinking about her past, thinking about why she had stopped playing, thinking about the people she had lost, the struggles she had faced. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized something important. She had survived all of it, and she had kept going, even when life had felt unbearable. Maybe she deserved to take one step back toward the dream she had left behind. The next morning arrived, and with it came a new feeling, a gentle determination. She didn't rush. She made breakfast, sat with it, and thought about what she wanted her life to become. When she finished eating, she took a deep breath, picked up her phone, and dialed the number on the card. Her heart pounded as the line rang. "Hello." Adrian's calm voice answered. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She swallowed and finally said, "It's me. From last night. I'm sorry if this is a bad time." "Not at all," he said warmly. "I'm glad you called. How are you feeling today?" She hesitated, still overwhelmed. "But I've been thinking. About music. About what you said." "I understand," he replied. "There's no pressure. Just tell me what you're comfortable with." She took a deep breath. "I'm not ready for anything big. But maybe I could come by and try practicing again." "Of course," he said without hesitation. "Whenever you're free. I can reserve a quiet space for you. No audience. No expectations. Just you and the piano." Her chest tightened with emotion. "Thank you." They arranged a time for later that week. When she ended the call, she sat still for a moment. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, like a part of her life that had been sealed shut was opening again. Just a little. The days leading up to her visit felt long but hopeful. When the day finally arrived, she walked into the building with her hands shaking. But when she stepped into the small practice room and saw the piano waiting for her, something inside her settled. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and pressed one note. It rang softly through the room. She breathed deeply. Then she played another note. Then another. Soon, her hands moved on their own. Searching for melodies, she thought she had forgotten. Adrian watched quietly from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. He smiled because he could see something inside her, waking up. As she continued playing, she felt lighter, freer. It wasn't about impressing anyone now. It wasn't about pressure or expectations. It was about reconnecting with a part of herself she had once loved. When she finally stopped, she felt tears on her cheeks, though she wasn't sure when they had started. That was beautiful. Adrian said softly. She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm crying." "You're not crying because you're sad," he said gently. "You're crying because you're healing." She looked down at her hands again. For the first time in a long while, she believed him. Over the next few weeks, she kept returning to the practice room. Little by little, she grew stronger. Her confidence grew. Her playing improved. She stopped flinching at mistakes and started welcoming challenges. And though she never said it aloud, she felt grateful for the night when the wealthy host had forced her to play. His intention had been unkind, but the outcome had changed everything. One afternoon, while practicing, Adrian walked in and said, "I think you're ready." "For what?" she asked, startled. "For people to hear you again. For you to share your music on your own terms this time." She froze. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." He smiled gently. "You don't have to decide today. Just think about it. If you want, I can help you record something small. Something simple. Something you can share if you choose." Her heart raced at the idea. Scary. Exciting. Something she never thought she'd consider again. She agreed to think about it. That evening, as she walked home through the glowing city streets, she realized something important. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer hiding. She was slowly building a new path for herself, one where music didn't have to be locked away. Weeks later, she recorded her first small piece. A gentle melody filled with emotion. A blend of hope and pain and healing. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. She allowed Adrian to share it with a small group of listeners. The reaction surprised her. People loved it. They felt the emotion behind it. They wanted more. And she realized something else. She wanted more too. As months passed, she slowly stepped into a new chapter of her life. Not a dramatic overnight transformation, but a steady climb. She wasn't aiming to become famous. She just wanted to create again, to feel the music, to breathe freely. One day, She unexpectedly crossed paths with the wealthy host again. He approached her awkwardly, clearly unsure of what to say. "I heard you've been playing again," he said, shifting uncomfortably. She nodded calmly. "I have." He cleared his throat. "I didn't expect things to turn out the way they did that night."